He abandoned poor wife with twin babies. Years later, they pulled up on private jet on her birthday. He abandoned her, his poor wife, on the day she gave birth to their twins, leaving her to face the world alone. With no help and no hope, she carried cement blocks, washed clothes, and did every menial job she could find just to feed her babies. While he lived in comfort, she endured years of hardship in silence. But on her birthday, as she wiped the sweat from her brow, a private jet landed nearby. And out stepped the twins. This is the story of a mother's pain, relentless sacrifice, and the sweet twist that left everyone stunned. Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request, please. Subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. Emily Carter never dreamed of living a grand life. She was a woman of simple hopes. Marriage, children, and a home where love ruled over money. That was all. When she first met Richard Blake, she thought her prayers had been answered. He was tall, handsome, with a smile that could charm any crowd. Richard was the kind of man who spoke sweetly in public, the kind who opened doors for strangers and laughed at everyone's jokes. But behind closed doors, his ambitions burned hotter than his affections. He wanted more. More money, more power, more recognition. And he wanted them fast. Emily didn't see that part of him at first. What she saw was the man who brought her flowers when she was tired, the man who whispered, "You're my everything, Emily." Against all odds, against the warnings whispered by neighbors and the sharp tongue of Richard's mother, Clara, Emily married him. Clara Blake never approved. From the day Emily entered their family, Clara made her distaste clear. She was a woman carved from ice, wealthy and proud, with eyes that could cut through anyone who stood in her way. "You don't belong in this family," Clara told Emily one evening, not long after the wedding. They had been sitting at the Blake mansion's dining table, the air thick with silence. Clara leaned across her wineglass and said in her cold, measured voice, "Richard deserves someone with breeding. Someone who can lift him higher, not you." Emily swallowed her shame and forced a polite smile. "With respect, Mrs. Blake, I love your son. I'll stand by him, no matter what." Clara's lips curled into a thin smirk. "Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't build empires. Let's see how long your devotion lasts when the world shows you no mercy." Richard never defended Emily during those moments. He always shifted uncomfortably, sometimes squeezing Emily's hand under the table as if to say, "Ignore her." But deep inside, Emily felt the sting of his silence. Still, she believed in him. She believed in their marriage. The day her faith was tested came far sooner than she imagined. It was the day of her children's birth. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and sweat. Emily gripped the bedsheets, her face pale and wet with tears, as nurses rushed around her. Hours of labor drained every ounce of strength she had. But when the sound of her baby's first cries pierced the air, something inside her lit up. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blake," the doctor said gently. "You have twins." A boy and a girl, Emily wept as they placed the babies in her arms. Her son, Daniel, wriggled restlessly, fists tiny but strong. Her daughter, Diana, nestled quietly, her eyes blinking curiously at the world. Emily kissed their foreheads, whispering, "My angels, my precious angels." She turned her head toward the door, waiting. Richard should be here. He should be the first to hold them. But the doorway stayed empty. When Richard finally entered, his expression was not one of joy, but of irritation, as though the cries of his newborns were nothing more than noise. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Emily asked softly, offering the babies toward him. Richard hesitated, then took a step back, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Emily, we need to talk." The warmth in her chest froze. Talk? Now? Yes. Now his tone was clipped, impatient. He looked at her as though the moment they were living, the miracle of new life, was nothing but an inconvenience. Emily's heart thudded. Richard, what's wrong? Before he could answer, Clara swept into the room, dressed in her expensive fur coat, jewelry. Glistening under the harsh hospital lights, she didn't bother to look at the babies, her eyes locked onto her son. Richard, Clara said sharply. It's time. Emily frowned. Time? Time for what? Clara's gaze cut through her like glass. Time for you to let go of this mistake. Emily's throat tightened. Mistake? These are your grandchildren, Clara sneered. Grandchildren born into poverty, into shame. Do you think money grows from washing laundry and scrubbing floors? My son has a future and you— She looked Emily up and down with open contempt. You'll drag him into the mud. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tense. Mother! No! Emily cried, her voice cracking. Richard, please! Look at them. Look at your children. Don't let her— But Richard wouldn't meet her eyes. Instead, he stared at the floor. Clara pressed on. You have an opportunity, Richard. A wealthy family wants you to marry their daughter. Do you know what that means? It means power. It means legacy. It means freedom from this burden. She waved her hand toward Emily and the babies as though brushing off dirt. Emily clutched her newborns tighter, her heart pounding in disbelief. Burden. Is that what we are to you, Richard? A burden? Richard finally looked at her. His eyes were cold, distant. Emily, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Her world collapsed in that single breath. Done? She whispered. You're leaving? Now? After everything? After these babies, your babies just came into this world? Richard stepped back toward the door. I need to think about my future. And my future isn't here. Emily shook her head violently. No, you can't. Richard, I gave up everything for you. My family, my dreams. I stood by you when no one else did. And now you walk away. But he was already gone. Clara followed him out, her heels clicking sharply against the hospital floor. Before leaving, she glanced back at Emily one last time, her voice dripping with venom. You'll survive if you can, Emily Carter. But don't expect a penny from us. The door slammed shut. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily stared at the door, her body trembling, her face wet with tears. The babies stirred in her arms, their soft cries pulling her back from the abyss of despair. She looked down at them, Daniel's tiny fists, Diana's blinking eyes. They were so innocent, so fragile, so unaware of the storm that had just destroyed their family before it even began. Emily pressed her lips against their foreheads. Her voice was hoarse, broken, yet filled with resolve. Don't cry, my angels. I'm here. I'll always be here. I don't know how. I don't know how I'll do it. But I swear to you, I will raise you. I will protect you. Even if I have to carry the world on my back. Her tears dripped onto their soft skin. She rocked them gently, whispering again and again, as much to herself as to them. I will survive. For you, only for you. In that moment, Emily Carter, abandoned, humiliated, heartbroken, made a silent vow. Her life had shattered, but for the sake of her twins, she would rise from the ashes. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give a future to children and women who have been abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing and turning on your notification bell, so you never miss a story that matters. Also, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and how did this story speak to you? The weeks after Richard walked out were the hardest of Emily's life. She left the hospital with 2 fragile infants in her arms, and nothing in her pockets. No savings, no home, not even a kind word from the man who had vowed to love her. Emily moved back into a crumbling one-room apartment at the edge of town. The roof leaked when it rained, and rats scurried in the shadows at night. She laid her babies in an old wooden crate padded with blankets because she couldn't afford a proper crib. Every time she looked at them, guilt twisted in her chest. "You deserve better," she whispered as she rocked Daniel and Diana to sleep. "But I promise, I'll give you a future, even if I break myself to pieces doing it." Days blurred into months, and Emily's life became a cycle of exhaustion. She woke before dawn, strapped Diana to her back, and carried Daniel in her arms to the local construction site. The foreman only hired her because no one else wanted the back-breaking jobs she was willing to take. The work was brutal. She hauled cement blocks until her arms shook. She mixed sand and water with blistered hands. She bent her back under the sun for pennies that barely bought bread and rice. The men mocked her behind her back, calling her the abandoned wife, but she pretended not to hear. At night, after dragging herself home, she washed laundry for neighbors. She scrubbed until her knuckles bled, her body aching, her eyes burning with sleeplessness. Sometimes, she fainted over the wash basin, but the sound of her babies crying would jolt her awake. The neighbors were cruel. On the streets, women whispered and laughed. "Look at her," one woman said as Emily carried a heavy basket of clothes. "Her husband left her for someone richer." "Can you blame him? She looks like a beggar." Another replied with a sneer. "She should have chosen better. Now she's nothing but a poor widow with living children." Emily heard every word. She never answered back. She swallowed the humiliation, straightened her shoulders, and walked on. At times, she went hungry so her children could eat. She wore the same torn dress until the fabric thinned almost to rags, just so she could save enough to buy school books for Daniel and Diana. One evening, after a long day of carrying bricks, she came home to find Diana crying from hunger. Emily had only one small piece of bread left. She cut it in half and gave it to the twins, drinking only water herself. As she watched them eat, her stomach twisting in emptiness, she whispered, "As long as you are full, I can live another day." Meanwhile, Richard's life was the opposite. News of him was everywhere. His face appeared in magazines, standing proudly beside his new wife, Vanessa Thornton, the daughter of a powerful businessman. Emily once glimpsed him from afar, driving a shiny black car through the streets, Vanessa beside him wearing diamonds that sparkled in the sun. The crowd praised him. People pointed at his success, calling him a man of ambition and vision. And whenever anyone asked about Emily, Richard spread his venom. "She betrayed me," he said in polished tones at dinner parties. "She was unfaithful. I had no choice but to leave the lies spread faster than wildfire." Soon, Emily was not only the abandoned wife, she was also the unfaithful wife. The betrayal cut her deeper than hunger or poverty. She wanted to scream the truth, to tell the world what Richard had done, but who would listen? He was rich and powerful. She was poor and invisible. So she kept silent, carrying her shame like another stone on her already broken back. Years rolled by in silence and struggle. Daniel and Diana grew, their faces bright with intelligence, their hearts softened by their mother's sacrifices. Emily could never give them toys or fine clothes, but she gave them something richer, her time, her love, and her determination. She pushed them to study even when candles were too expensive, and they had to read by the faint light of the moon. She went without new shoes so she could buy them notebooks. One evening, while Daniel bent over his homework, he looked up and asked, "Mama, why do you work so hard for us?" Emily brushed the sweat from her forehead, smiled weakly and said, "Because you two are my heart. If I lose everything but I raise you to be kind, honest and strong, then I've won." That was the moment Mr. Anderson noticed her. Mr. Anderson was a retired teacher, a quiet man who owned a small shop down the street. He had watched Emily for years, how she struggled without complaint, how she never spoke ill of Richard even when the town mocked her. He saw her carry bricks in the hot sun with her babies tied to her back, and something in his heart stirred. One day, he approached her. "Mrs. Carter," he said kindly as she scrubbed laundry by the roadside. "Do you ever think of what your children might become?" Emily looked up, her hands raw and wet. "Every day, I dream they'll have a life better than mine. And what if someone wanted to help them? Would you accept it?" Emily hesitated. Pride was a heavy chain, but the sight of Daniel and Diana sitting barefoot nearby, their clothes worn thin, broke it. She nodded. If it's for them, yes. From that day, Mr. Anderson quietly took the twins under his wing. He paid for their schooling, sometimes slipping money into their school bags, sometimes dropping off supplies at Emily's door. He never made a show of it, never demanded gratitude. When Emily thanked him, he simply said, "I believe in your children." That's all. What Emily didn't know was that his help went further. As the years passed and the twins excelled, Mr. Anderson used his connections to arrange for scholarships abroad. He never told Emily the full truth. He didn't want to wound her pride or make her feel indebted. For Emily, it was enough to know that someone believed in her children. Still, the world didn't make it easy. Even as Daniel and Diana grew sharper, stronger, and more ambitious, Emily's reputation remained ruined. When she walked through the marketplace, people still whispered, "There she is, the woman who was abandoned. Her husband said she cheated." Imagine the shame, she'll never escape it. But Emily learned to walk past them with her head high. She carried her pain silently, her heart still bruised but her spirit unbroken. Every time she looked at her children, she told herself it was worth it, and in the stillness of many nights, after the twins had fallen asleep, she would kneel by their bedside and whisper, "Someday, the world will see who you are, and when that day comes, they'll know I was never a failure. You two are my victory." Emily Carter had been left with nothing but heartbreak. Yet in her silence and her suffering, she planted seeds of greatness in her children. She didn't know it yet, but the sacrifices she made, the hunger she endured, the humiliation she swallowed, were all building toward a day of reckoning. For while Richard Blake climbed to the top with lies and betrayal, Emily was raising the very ones who would bring her honor back and bring him to his knees. Years turned into decades, and Emily Carter's quiet endurance became her armor. The once crying twins she carried on her back, Daniel and Diana, had grown into remarkable young adults. Though Emily lived simply, wearing the same faded dresses and still working odd jobs to make ends meet, her children were thriving in ways she could scarcely have imagined. Through scholarships and the silent generosity of Mr. Anderson, Daniel and Diana studied overseas. They wrote letters home filled with cautious words. They never told Emily everything. They didn't boast of the awards they won or the circles of influence they moved in. They knew their mother's heart. She would never want to hear them brag. Instead, they wrote things like, "We are studying hard, Mama. We promise to make you proud," and Emily believed them. She continued to live in her small apartment, still washing clothes, still walking to the market with her basket of worn vegetables. To the neighbors, she was the same abandoned woman who had been left behind years ago. They had no idea that her twins were rising stars in the world beyond their dusty town. Emily never corrected them. She never defended herself. She carried her secret close to her chest, waiting for the right moment when the truth would shine on its own. While Emily's life remained humble but steady, Richard Blake's grand castle began to crumble. At first, the world only saw the surface, the expensive suits, the parties, the fancy cars. But behind the glitter, corruption brewed. Richard made reckless business deals, cutting corners, bribing officials, pocketing money that wasn't his. For years he got away with it, but no one outruns the truth forever. One by one, his partnerships began to fail. Investments collapsed. Whispers of fraud followed him. The proud man who once walked through town with his head high now struggled to keep his empire standing. Vanessa, his second wife, noticed. She had married him for wealth and status, not loyalty. When the money began to dry up, her love dried up too. Soon, she stopped accompanying him to events, leaving him to face the world alone. At home, arguments filled the halls. "You promised me security, Richard," Vanessa hissed one night, her diamond necklace glittering against her angry face. "I didn't leave everything behind to live like a fool." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Do you think I wanted this? Do you think it's easy carrying the weight of an empire?" "Empire," Vanessa scoffed. "All I see is a sinking ship, and I won't drown with you." Her words cut him deeper than any business loss. But the cruelest blade still came from his mother, Clara. Old age had not softened her. If anything, it sharpened her tongue. Whenever she crossed paths with Emily in the marketplace, she unleashed her venom. Well, Clara said one morning, eyeing Emily with disdain. "Still scrubbing floors, are you? What a shame. My son soared to the skies, while you are still crawling in the dirt." Emily bit her lip, refusing to answer. Clara smirked, pleased with the silence. "You could have been smart, Emily. You could have held on to him, but no, you let him slip away, and now look at you. Nothing. A ghost of a woman." Emily smiled faintly, though her heart ached. "Sometimes, Mrs. Blake," she said softly, "nothing is more valuable than peace." Clara frowned, not expecting such a reply. But Emily walked away, leaving the old woman to stew in her bitterness. Inside, however, Emily's chest burned. Not from shame, but from a quiet, unshakable knowledge. If only you knew, Clara. If only you knew what Daniel and Diana have become. While Richard's empire faltered and Clara sneered, Daniel and Diana were preparing something extraordinary. Now adults in their mid-20s, the twins had become brilliant in their own fields. Daniel had built a thriving technology company, his ideas drawing investors from around the globe. Diana, with her sharp mind and graceful presence, had become a leader in finance, her name whispered with respect in powerful boardrooms. They had more than enough money, influence and connections to live lavish lives abroad. But their hearts remained tied to one woman, their mother. In countless late-night phone calls to each other, they planned. "Emily Carter deserves the world," Daniel said firmly. "She gave up her life for us," Diana agreed. "Now it's time we give her the life she deserves." So, in secret, they arranged their return. They purchased a private jet. They gathered gifts, treasures, and the most extravagant surprises. They planned not just to visit, but to make a statement so loud, so undeniable, that even Richard Blake and Clara would never again mock or dismiss Emily Carter. They marked the date carefully, their mother's birthday. Emily had almost forgotten about birthdays. For years they passed like any other day, quiet, unnoticed, spent at work. She didn't expect gifts or parties or even kind words. As her next birthday approached, she felt the same as always. She scrubbed laundry by the riverside, her hands raw. That evening she returned home, cooked a simple meal of rice and sat alone. Her heart ached with loneliness, but she smiled anyway. She told herself she didn't need a celebration. Her children had called that morning, their voices warm, telling her, "We love you, Mama." That was enough. Still, as she blew out the small candle on her table, the silence pressed on her chest. She felt forgotten by the world. She looked at the peeling walls of her little apartment and whispered, "Lord, if nothing else, let my children be safe. That's all I ask." She had no idea what was coming. Across the skies, the roar of engines stirred the evening air. The private jet Daniel and Diana had chartered sliced through the clouds, heading straight toward the town Emily called home. Inside, the twins held hands, their eyes shining with anticipation. "After tonight," Diana said softly, "she'll never feel alone again." "After tonight," Daniel echoed, "the world will know who Emily Carter really is." Suspense hung heavy in the air, as if destiny itself was holding its breath. The seeds of revenge had been sown in silence for years. Now, at last, they were about to bloom. Emily Carter's birthday arrived like any other day, quiet, unnoticed, and heavy with work. She rose before dawn, her bones aching from years of labor. She tied her faded scarf around her hair, slipped on her worn shoes, and walked to the construction site where she sometimes found day labor. That morning, the foreman handed her a shovel and ordered her to move sand from one end of the lot to the other. By noon, her dress was soaked in sweat, her arms weak from lifting, her back bent under the weight of each load. The younger workers whispered behind her, mocking the old woman who still labored like a mule. "She's wasting her life," one muttered. "Imagine being left on your birthday, carrying sand," another said with a laugh. Emily ignored them, as she always did. Her pride was too deep, her silence too strong. When the day ended, she wiped the dust from her face and whispered to herself, "Happy birthday, Emily." She walked home slowly, her basket empty, her stomach hollow. She lit a small candle in her one-room apartment, cooked a thin meal of rice and salt, and sat at the table alone. For years, this was how birthdays had passed, without celebration, without company. Yet tonight, something stirred in the air. As Emily blew out her candle, a deep roar shook the skies. The sound was unfamiliar, powerful, like thunder tearing through the heavens. She stepped outside, shielding her eyes. The townspeople rushed into the streets, craning their necks to see. A sleek, luxurious private jet sliced through the clouds, descending lower and lower until it touched down in the open field just beyond the marketplace. The dust swirled, the earth trembled, and gasps filled the air. A private jet, here, in their small town. People whispered in awe. Who could it be? A politician? A billionaire? Emily clutched her scarf tighter, her heart racing. She never imagined what was about to happen. The jet's door opened, and a staircase unfolded. From within stepped Daniel and Diana. No one recognized them at first. They were no longer the skinny children who once wore patched clothes and studied under the moonlight. They were radiant now, dressed in fine suits and gowns, their presence commanding, their aura unmistakably powerful. Cameras flashed from reporters who had followed them. Bodyguards moved aside as the twins descended with grace. Daniel's eyes searched the crowd until they landed on her. His mother, standing in her worn dress, her face streaked with dust and fatigue. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Mama." Diana rushed ahead, her heels clicking on the stairs, and ran straight to Emily. She fell to her knees in the dirt, wrapping her arms around her mother. Tears streamed down her flawless face. "Mama!" "We're home." Emily's basket slipped from her hands. She stared in disbelief as Daniel embraced her too, pressing his forehead to hers like he had done as a child. "My beautiful mother," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "we've come back for you. Everything we are, everything we've achieved, it's all because of you." The crowd gasped, murmurs spread like wildfire. "Those are her children. The abandoned twins. They came back on a private jet?" Daniel turned to the people gathered. "Do you see this woman? She worked her hands to the bone so we could rise. She starved so we could eat. She wore rags so we could go to school. The world calls us successful, but the real success is standing right here." Diana wiped Emily's tears and added, "She was mocked, humiliated, and abandoned. Yet she never gave up on us. Tonight we honor her, not as a victim, but as a queen." Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. "My children. I don't need all this. Just seeing you alive, seeing you strong, That's enough for me. But Daniel smiled through his tears. It's not enough for us, Mama. The world must know the truth. They kissed her hands, one on each side, as the crowd erupted in cheers. For the first time in years, Emily Carter stood not as the abandoned wife, but as the honored mother. Not far away, Richard Blake watched. He had heard the commotion and arrived with Clara and Vanessa, his wealthy wife. The sight before him twisted his gut, the twins, magnificent and powerful, standing proudly with the woman he had once thrown away. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Those are your children. Richard stepped forward quickly, desperate. Daniel? Diana, my children, you've come back. You must forgive me. I was young, foolish, but I am still your father. The crowd fell silent, waiting. Emily's heart froze as Richard stretched his arms toward the twins, feigning affection, but Daniel's face hardened. His voice was sharp as steel. You are no father to us. Richard flinched. What are you saying? I gave you life. You gave us nothing, Diana snapped, her voice trembling with fury. You abandoned us the day we were born. You left our mother to starve, to suffer, to carry us on her back while you lived in wealth. Daniel's voice rose, echoing across the field. A father protects. A father provides. A father doesn't walk away because his mother whispers in his ear. You are not our father. You are a coward. Gasps rippled through the crowd. All eyes turned to Clara, who stood rigid, her face pale. Daniel pointed at her. And you poisoned him against our mother. You mocked her, shamed her, and left her in the dirt. Look at her now. Look at us now. Do you still think she was beneath you? Clara's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time in her life, she was speechless. The community, once cruel and mocking, began to cheer loudly for Emily. Men removed their hats, women clapped, children shouted her name. Emily Carter! They cried. Emily Carter! Richard fell to his knees in humiliation, reaching out. Please, children, don't do this. I've lost everything. I need you now. But Diana turned away. You lost us the day you walked out of that hospital. We owe you nothing. Tears poured down Richard's face as Vanessa sneered, disgusted by his desperation. She turned her back on him, muttering, I didn't marry a beggar. Richard was left broken, humiliated before the entire town. Meanwhile, Daniel and Diana lifted Emily onto the stage that had been set for their celebration. They crowned her with a golden scarf, draped her shoulders with jewels, and placed her hands in theirs. Everything we are, Diana declared, is because of this woman. She is our hero, Daniel said firmly. She is our victory. Emily, overwhelmed, whispered, I don't need crowns or jewels. My greatest treasure is you. But the crowd shouted back, No, Emily! You are the treasure! Tears filled her eyes as the people who once mocked her now praised her. The humiliation she had carried for years melted away, replaced with honor, love, and respect. At last, the truth was undeniable. Betrayal had wounded her, yes, but integrity, sacrifice, and love had written her final chapter, and it was glorious.